E te whānau, ko ngā uri o te reo Māori, koutou e ingo nei ki tō tātou reo rangatira, ngai pī koko mātou ranga, tēnā koutou nau mai hara mai ki tā mātou, o tira ki tā tātou kaupapa. Te Tari Tūtai is an action comedy that's entirely in te reo Māori. It's an entertaining resource meant to help revitalize te reo Māori by providing people a way that they can practice simple phrases in the Māori language in a way that doesn't feel like study or learning. I wanted to share a little bit about how we made this, but first I wanted to talk about how this idea and this kaupapa even came to be. Me and my crew of creative collaborators have been making films for years together. And although we have been able to do paid work over the years, a lot of the time we are working for free because a lot of the time our client doesn't actually have money to pay us. But if they are doing something that we believe in, like providing lunches for children who need it, or just making some amazing music, one way that we can support their kaupapa is to create something amazing for them and to do it for free. However, a few years ago, I reached the point where I just didn't want to keep asking my crew to work for free. They're trained professionals, they're incredibly good at what they do, and they deserve to get paid for their skills. So I made the resolution that if I was going to bring another project to them, it was going to be paid. The problem is that getting funding can be incredibly hard. And projects that are entirely in te reo Māori aren't normally seen as a great commercial opportunity, and therefore getting the funds can be quite hard. And I once applied for funding for a project that was all in te reo Māori. After we got rejected, I realized that the YouTube link of the pitch video that they asked us to send had 0 views, which means not only did they not watch it, no one even clicked on it to this day, and I keep it there to remind me. That's just the reality of being a filmmaker. 99.99% of ideas never go anywhere because they can't get funded. But I had this idea. It was a resource that could help people to practice simple, basic reo Māori in a way that wasn't education-based, but it was entertainment-based. It was an action comedy about secret agents, entirely in te reo Māori. It was called Te Tari Tūtai, which means the spy department or the department of surveillance or something like that. I could have called it Te Tari Tūtai, which means the same thing, but I called it Te Tari Tūtai because it sounds very similar to Te Tari Tūtai, which means the poop department. So there's a poop joke in the title. It's like Schitt's Creek. So trying to pitch this to people was hard, as in it was hard for them to get what I was trying to do. So because it was hard to picture, it was hard to believe in, and it was hard to support. So what we needed was a proof of concept, which is where you make a smaller version of something to demonstrate what it is so people can see it in front of their eyes. So I called up my crew and I asked them to work for free, again, and we made a 3-minute concept short of this idea. And it turned out really well, but it was just a one-off because making these consistently just was not feasible. So because it was just a one-off, it kind of simmered and died, as so many ideas do. But I just knew that there were people who would benefit from this, but it had to be real. It couldn't just be in my head. So I decided to do another proof of concept, but this one had to be different. This one had to be an ongoing series that could be released to the public so that we could prove the benefits. It had to prove itself in its entirety before anybody would support it, I believed. But it was also important that no one has to pay to watch this. I wanted it to be free and accessible to everyone, everywhere. I also didn't want to crowdfund. We're all struggling with the cost of living, and the last thing we need is another person asking for money from us. So I didn't want to do any of that. I didn't want the funding to come from the people who need it. I wanted it to come from other things like partnerships or licensing agreements or government grants or merchandising or anything like that. So I thought if I could create it in its fullness, then people could see the value and then the revenue could come. And so that's exactly what we did. And we're only a few weeks in, and already we've had some organizations express interest in supporting this kaupapa financially, so that hopefully by the time we do season 2, not only can this be an ongoing valuable resource to those a bit afraid to start their reo journey, but it can also be a source of paid work for my crew and other creative collaborators that I want to bring on. So that's a bit about the background. Now, here is a very brief overview of how we made it. So I had the idea about 5 years ago. I started writing the script about 1.5 years ago. And I wasn't working on it full time, so I was just chipping away at it in the background. Writing the script was a delicate balancing act of creating comic situations that simultaneously demonstrated certain language principles of te reo Māori. And I would confer with people who knew more than I did, especially about particular words or terms that were especially unique or uncommon. Once I felt the script was ready, then it was time to do the storyboard and the shot list. Now, because this was a proof of concept, I would be playing all the characters and it would be shot in front of a green screen. So what that means is, because we wouldn't physically be in the space, things like eye lines, the direction of the key light, all those things had to be planned in advance so that when we put it together, we didn't accidentally have a character facing this way when they should be facing this way and it looks like they're talking to nobody, or that the sun keeps moving. All those things had to be noted down and planned meticulously from the beginning. So then it was time to prep for shooting. So every prop, every accessory that the characters physically interacted with was a physical object, either sourced and modified or created from scratch. As you can see here, this doesn't look even remotely real. These are clearly paper towel rolls taped together. This is a USB charger that I took apart, but there's actually a good reason for that. Later on, when we apply the cartoon filter, things that have too much detail don't actually turn out as well as simple, bold shapes and colors. So every prop was a physical object, right down to the bag of salt.
Pēnei.
This is also when we designed certain key elements. So the badge, for example, I drew the initial design in Procreate, and then in Adobe Illustrator I created the vector image of it. Then handed it off to our art director, who created a 3D model, and then we printed them. That's also when we went through and designed the wardrobe, the hair and makeup, and just the overall look for each character. Then, about 8 months ago, in July 2024, we shot the entire first season. It took about a week of long days to get it all done. We would start with one character and shoot all their scenes, and then when that character was done, we would change the look, shave the beard down, somehow shape it a bit, do the next character. And we had to be very careful which order we did which character, because we couldn't go back if we missed something. So it was a lot of keeping track of a lot of things, making sure the dialogue was delivered correctly, making sure I was looking in the right direction, timing my interactions with my imaginary scene partners. Because I still wasn't working on this full time, it was actually months before I had a chance to edit the footage. Now, I've used Adobe Premiere Pro since 2015 for editing, and it's definitely my recommendation, though I do use DaVinci Resolve when I'm wanting more of a thorough color grade. The editing process for this was actually pretty standard, just going through the raw footage, piecing together the scenes in a way that the narrative thread and the timing could all work together. And because there were speech bubbles in English, I needed to add an extra half a beat for every line of dialogue to give people a chance to process it. So the timing was actually a little bit weird in the initial edit, but that was something that I was able to tweak later on. So a couple of years ago, my crew and I made a music video with a superhero comic book theme, and our art director developed an aesthetic to reflect this theme. What we did is we added the cartoon effect in After Effects, lowered the frame rate, and created backgrounds and fire animations all in After Effects. So when it came to this project, my immediate thought was, let's replicate the music video. So the initial plan was to use the cartoon effect, which had been available in After Effects since 1997. But in the end, we found that Go Enhance AI had a pop art filter that was a lot more aligned to the look we were going for. So we applied the filter to the footage, imported it into After Effects, and used Key Light to key out the green screen. So the environments are a combination of generative AI and my own drawings. So this is a background that I'm just drawing, and it's going to end up in the final episode, I believe. Just wanted to show you, this is a kumara that I drew and animated for one of our commercial breaks. Not actually in one of the episodes, but this is the establishing shot of Te Paihana, the fictional city in which the story takes place. So I've taken this image generated in Midjourney, and I've added all these structures into it. Just give a subtle Māori flavor to it. I planned out the shape of the structures and created them in Blender, and then used that as a reference to draw in just these things that could help create an overall environment that feels very modern and urban and reflects Te Ao Māori. For the second season, I hope to create the entire city in Blender so that you can just roam around and inhabit whatever part you want for whatever scene. For certain elements, like the flags in the office scene, I went out and bought flags, set them up, took a photograph, and then put them into Photoshop, removed the background, applied the same cartoon effect, and then added them to the scene. So using photographs was actually very helpful, especially for things that needed to be quite specific and unique. For the opening sequence, I created the dotted effect and the asymmetrical text box aesthetic in Photoshop, and then finally composited all these elements together in After Effects, placing each element in 3D space and then adding some 3D camera movement to give it a cinematic feel. I actually re-recorded all the dialogue again in post-production, and the reason for this is while we were shooting, there are just so many different things to think about and so many things to potentially miss. So this meant I was able to focus just on the dialogue and nothing else, and it also meant we could get the sound nice and clean. And then I wrote the music. Which I then recorded and produced in Logic Pro, which is also where I created the musical score for certain other scenes.
Tahi, Rua, Toru.
All in all, there have been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours that have gone into this. Even though we're releasing them weekly, we are absolutely not making one of these per week. That would be impossible. These were shot 8 months ago. We've been editing them for a few months. We essentially had to almost get it all finished before we could start releasing the first one because it was so quick. The first people I ever showed it to are also the most important audience of all, which are my own whānau. We didn't grow up with the privilege of having our reo in our home, but I hope that now, as many of us have started our reo journey, I hope that these resources can be a huge benefit and support and can be something we can all share in together. Then after that, we released it to the public so that anyone else who wanted to join in on this kaupapa could do that. Now we're still at the beginning. Our audience isn't huge by any means, but already I've been able to hear experiences from some people who in the past didn't feel like they could learn te reo Māori, felt self-doubt, felt like an imposter, who have said that these videos have been a fun, light, positive thing for them and have made them think, actually, this isn't too bad, I could do this. And behind the camera, this is already creating opportunities for paid work for creative professionals who work extremely hard, but if their kaupapa doesn't align with what's going to make the most money, may struggle to find funding and paid work. Collaborating with like-minded creatives is the best part about filmmaking, which is why as soon as there was any talk of organizations potentially supporting this financially, I straight on the phone to my crew and other creators whom I've met but haven't had the chance to work with yet, saying that's going to be us for season 2. And Te Tari Tūtai is just a starting point. In the coming years, I hope to make a whole bunch of films, series, music, in different formats and genres, all in te reo Māori. Behind the scenes, I want this to be a source of paid opportunities for creatives, actors, musicians, artists, designers, stunt people. And on the audience's side, I want Pēnei Productions to be just another space that you can enter to be immersed in te reo Māori in a way that isn't intimidating or scary. And someday, I want to make a feature-length live-action film of Te Tari Tūtai, which we can all go see in the cinema. But in order to get there, you first need to start. And at the end of the day, that's exactly what this is, the start of a journey.